got a 157 on my November LSAT, and then I decided to take it again, and I've been prepping with like Khan Academy and a Kaplan book for about like 4 months now. And I've plateaued in the low 160s. I like can't seem to hit that, but now I'm like only 2 weeks away. So I don't know what to do to like cross that plateau in 2 weeks, you know?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Are there any particular areas where you're feeling stuck?
I feel like logical reasoning. I've improved a lot in logic games, and reading comp was definitely one of my stronger sections, but logical reasoning, I always seem to like miss just the most in that section, and I don't really know why.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any particular question types or maybe questions regarding your approach?
Definitely science questions. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like part of it is just a lack of comprehension, or I'm trying to read too hard into the stimulus. But overall, like just logical reasoning in general.
Okay. And what's your logical reasoning approach like in general? When you see a question, what do you do first?
Okay, so I always read the stimulus and then read the question and then read the stimulus again. And then I know I'm supposed to be predicting the answers, but I always try to like do process of elimination and just cross them all out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I normally second guess myself. Like I always have it down to the right two, and then I pick the wrong one.
Gotcha. I hear what you're saying. Okay. So I'm not going to recommend that you radically change your approach in the final 2 weeks specifically. So we could talk about stimulus versus question stem first, but that's a conversation I think for another time. With 2 weeks remaining, I would instead hone in on what you said earlier about science questions in particular, questions involving scientific topics. Where do you come into when you're reading the stimulus specifically? What are you looking for first?
I think I read it like a reading comprehension like passage. I'm like actually reading for content.
Mm-hmm. When you're reading comp on the LSAT specifically, what are you looking for there?
So I also just kind of read for understanding, but I've been trying to like learn to read for viewpoints and argument side, but I think my first read is always just content.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think what I have to share with you here applies to both reading comp and logical reasoning, which is it's not about the content, it's about the structure. So you want to be looking for the conclusion. In reading comp, that's the main point, the main idea, the author's opinion. In logical reasoning, it's the conclusion. So read with that in mind. And that doesn't require radically changing your overall flow or your overall process, but it does have a bit of a different perspective to it. So you're reading, you could read stimulus or question stem, or you could read reading comp, the passage simply in order, but read with an eye towards the conclusions, the main idea. And then go for the evidence. This is not a test about content. It's about structure. It's about how they go about making their arguments. So I would implement that immediately on both reading comp and logical reasoning. And that applies to science in particular, because the science topics can trip you up, but it's never really about the topic. They don't care what you know about science. They care about, can you interpret an argument that happens to be about science? But that same method of reasoning, that same general principle could very easily apply to a totally different topic. Think about things like correlation causation. It could be about heart disease, or it could be about climate change, or it could be about car accidents and speed limits.
That makes sense. Okay, so when you see a stimulus, how do you find the conclusion? Like just quickly, or do you still read through the whole thing and then like point out which part is the conclusion?
That's a good question. So there are cases where they use particular indicator words like thus, therefore, hence. Other times they don't. And so that requires a little bit more work for you to see, how do these two different sentences relate to each other? Which one is supporting the other one? You may have no indicators at all, or you may have only an evidence indicator and no conclusion indicator, in which case you could see, okay, well, if one part's the evidence, the other part is probably the conclusion, if there were only two parts. So that's how you could go about it. If you see the indicators in the moment, that makes it smoother. Otherwise, in the absence of indicators, you may have to actually reread certain parts. But again, you're always reading for, why did they say this? What point are they trying to communicate? There are occasionally fact sets, of course, but most of logical reasoning is arguments. So this is what reading actively comes down to. You talked about making predictions, and reading actively can help you make predictions. You don't always have to make them, of course, and sometimes the correct answer isn't what your prediction was, but part of reading actively means you're anticipating certain things. You're having an idea of where they might go.
Okay, but do you recommend still reading all 5 answer choices, or do you stop once you find one you like?
Generally, I would read all 5.
Okay.
And I would, because they're very tricky. They're very good at putting in tempting wrong answers. And so just to confirm, just to double check, it is worth it, especially on logical reasoning and reading comprehension, where you can have those ambiguities of language. So what's your plan like for the next 2 weeks? We could shift gears and talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so I have like 4 more practice tests that I wanted to take over the next couple days, and then kind of just drilling more logic games, just making sure I was like ready for it. I'm kind of nervous about the LSAT Flex format, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, I assume you've read a lot about it or watched the videos about it, so you have a sense of what's going on there. So 4 practice tests over the course of 2 weeks, especially if they're 3-section flex tests, not 5 sections, that seems pretty doable to me. And just reviewing them. And as far as being nervous about the format, the best thing you can do is do those 3-section tests and see where you stand. And then also, as you've already been doing, learn everything you can about them. I have an FAQ page on my site. I also have a YouTube playlist. I've put out tons of information about this. And so the more you learn, the better prepared you can be. And you can also even test out your equipment with a ProctorU tech support rep before test day. You could do that now.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a website on their page at proctoru.com. If you go to testitout.proctoru.com, test it out with hyphens between the words, you can actually check your system. And then if you have issues, you can actually chat via text over like a text chat box sort of thing with a rep, and they can actually set up your computer so that on test day you're ready to go.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend it. That's another thing that you can remove uncertainty, remove potential problems to ensure that test day goes smoothly.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. What else?
I guess, and then logic games. Any tricks to just speed up? Like, what is your go-to method?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's hard to summarize all of it in just one conversation, but I could say making inferences up front can help you, and using previous hypothetical situations that you've drawn can also help you. There's also the correct answer to the orientation question. And so all of those things together can help you shave off some time and work more efficiently. Any valid scenario could potentially help you eliminate things in a must be true question, or find the correct answer in a could be true question, for example. So save your previous work, refer back to it whenever possible, and consider doing the questions out of order. You could do the local questions, then the global questions, so that you have more hypotheticals to help you out.
Okay, so how do you know when you're done with inferences, like you've made as many as you possibly could?
Yeah, that's a really common question, and there's no easy answer to it. It really comes through experience. What I would say is make sure you're working methodically. And then if you're working methodically and systematically, you reach a natural stopping point where you can't go any further. And so I wouldn't try to go further just for the sake of making more inferences. Work as systematically as you can. And when you reach a point where you find that it wouldn't be useful to go further, where there would be too much open-ended, then just stop there and move on. Okay. It varies from game to game, and some games have very little upfront in the way of inferences. Others have a ton. It'll vary. But over time, as you're drilling games for practice, notice where you could have gone further. And so do what you can, then potentially redo the game after looking at explanations.
And is it beneficial to redo games that you've already done? I kind of feel like that's cheating.
I mean, it'll definitely inflate your results, but the point of doing these games is not simply to measure yourself. It's to better understand the material. And so if redoing a game could help you see it with a new perspective and see a new way you can go about making inferences differently, or you could approach the questions differently using your previous work, that's to your advantage. You're not looking to solve that game on test day. You're looking to take the insights you can gain about how to solve it for a future game.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't think so. I don't know. I'm kind of nervous, but ready to get this over with.
Of course. Well, learn what you can about the flex, do the 4 practice tests, and review them in depth. If you can walk away from those exams after having reviewed them, understanding everything that gave you trouble, everything you got wrong, then you can walk in that much more confident that you've left no stone unturned. So just maximize your prep these next 2 weeks, stay focused, and then you'll be done with it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think hearing that I could do logic games questions out of order, because I just like, it's human nature to want to go in order. But I do see a lot of value in like getting as many hypothetical scenarios out on the paper as possible to help me with the other questions. So that's something I'm definitely going to implement this week.
Awesome. Well, keep in touch and let me know if you need anything at all as you move forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.